Touch me, kill me. Chapter 3, Skin Hunger. 60 miles of gravel road separated Orgasta Cliffs from the range, and every single one of those miles was trying to kill Dex's truck. "This is not a road," Theo said from the back seat, gripping the oh shit handle as we bounced over a pothole deep enough to qualify as infrastructure. "This is a suggestion of a road. A road's rough draft." "It's character building," Dex said, wrestling the steering wheel through another washboard section. He was enjoying this. Dex enjoyed anything that involved his truck, physical discomfort, and proximity to me. I was in the passenger seat, watching the Alaskan wilderness scroll past the window like a nature documentary directed by God on an ambitious day. Old-growth spruce towering and dark. Glacier-fed rivers running turquoise over gray rock. Mountains that went up and up and up until they hit snow and kept going. The scale of everything was offensive, the kind of landscape that made you understand, on a cellular level, that you were very small and the world was very old, and nothing you did would ever register on its time scale. I loved it. Embarrassingly, achingly loved it. From the back seat, Theo was reading aloud from a book on pre-colonial Alaskan petroglyphs, his voice steady and precise despite the truck's best efforts to jostle the words out of him. He'd found a section on ritualistic binding practices, and he was narrating it in a tone that made academic text sound like a bedtime story. The anchoring function of these petroglyphic systems suggests a sophisticated understanding of spatial energetic relationships, wherein the physical marking of specific locations served to establish a network of... "Theo," Dex said, "I understand maybe every third word you're saying, and I'm okay with that. But could you do it in a voice that doesn't make me want to pull over?" Theo paused. "I'm reading about petroglyphs." "Yeah, and you're reading about petroglyphs like you're narrating erotica. It's the cadence, it's doing things." I stared very intently out the window. The trees were very interesting, very green. "I'll adjust my delivery," Theo said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, even though I wasn't looking at him. Dex reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. I froze. He froze. The gesture had been automatic, instinctive, tender, the kind of thing a man did when he'd been thinking about a woman's face so much that his hand moved without consulting his brain. His fingers had grazed the shell of my ear, the barest whisper of skin contact, and even that minimal touch sent a shiver of psychic static through me. Not a full vision, just a pulse of feeling. His feeling. Warmth and want and the specific ache of restraining himself. He pulled his hand back. "Sorry, forgot." He didn't forget. He never forgot. He just couldn't stop himself, and the fact that every time he slipped, every time his body overrode his discipline, I got a direct download of how much he wanted me. It was making the truck cab feel approximately 400 degrees. "It's fine," I said in a voice that was not fine. In the rearview mirror, Theo was watching both of us with an expression I couldn't decode. His lips were slightly parted. His eyes were dark. Nobody spoke for 5 miles. The range was not what I expected. I'd imagined a commune in the stereotype sense. Tie-dye tents, someone playing a didgeridoo badly, a shared conviction that deodorant was a conspiracy. What I got instead was a functioning community. Solar panels on every structure, garden plots bursting with kale and cold weather greens, a water collection system that would have made an engineer weep with admiration. Yurts and converted school buses and hand-built cabins, painted in colors that ranged from tasteful forest green to a school bus that was, audaciously, hot pink. About 100 people lived here, and the first thing I noticed about them was that they were, to a person, distractingly beautiful. Not in a Hollywood way, in an alive way. Sun-weathered skin, bodies that moved with the economy of people who used them for actual work, an ease in their own flesh that came from living without mirrors and dress codes, and the corrosive self-consciousness of civilization. They wore what was functional, flannels, overalls, hand-knit sweaters, and they wore it like they'd forgotten that clothing was supposed to be about anything other than keeping warm. "This is..." Dex trailed off, looking around with the expression of a man who'd just walked into a party where everyone was better looking than him, which was a novel experience for Dex. "Noted," I said. I didn't say anything. "You thought it very loudly." Theo, who was pretending not to notice the general attractiveness of the population with the dedicated focus of a man sitting an exam, adjusted his glasses and said, "We should find Sage Delacroix. We didn't need to find her. She found us." Sage Delacroix walked toward us from the direction of the central fire pit, with the unhurried grace of someone who owned the ground she walked on. She was in her mid-40s, black, tall enough to look Dex in the eye, and radiating a calm so profound it felt almost narcotic, like standing in a warm current, like being told without words that everything was going to be fine. She wore a long linen tunic and her locks were wrapped in indigo cloth, and when she smiled, it was with the patience of a woman who had been waiting for us to arrive. "Marlow Kane," she said. "Not a question. I'm Sage. We've been expecting you." "How?" "The land told us you were coming." She said this the way someone else might say, "I saw your car on the road." Factually, without drama. She turned her dark eyes to Dex and Theo. "And the fisherman. And the doctor." She considered them. "You are very beautiful together." "Thank you," Dex said. It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. Beautiful things attract attention. You'll want to be careful here about what notices you. She walked. We followed. Behind me, I felt Dex and Theo exchange a glance, the kind of wordless communication that happened between two people who'd been in each other's orbit long enough to have a shared frequency. The greenhouse was enormous, a barn-sized structure made of reclaimed windows and industrial plastic, humid enough inside to fog Theo's glasses immediately. Plants filled every surface, herbs I recognized, herbs I didn't, flowering specimens that had no business growing in Alaska and were growing anyway. The air smelled like green things and earth, and something underneath that I couldn't identify, something sweet and ancient and slightly electrical. Sage poured tea. It was the kind of hospitality that was also an interrogation. She asked questions with the cadence of someone pouring water into a glass, watching how the answers settled. "The symbols," she said, when I described what had been carved into Hank Alessan's chest. "Show me." Theo had photographs on his phone. Sage studied them, her face betraying nothing, and then set the phone down with a care that suggested the images were heavier than they looked. "They're a binding language," she said. "Very old, older than the founding families. Older than the Tellinget presence in this region. These symbols are part of a system used to anchor spiritual forces to physical locations." She paused. "Like a nail driven into a map." Theo's exact words. The coincidence, or the shared knowledge, sat between us. "Someone carved these into Hank," I said. "After he was dead. Not to kill him, to mark him, to make his death useful." Sage's voice was steady, but something flickered behind her eyes, the first crack in her composure. "The body becomes a fixed point, an anchor. The soul's departure leaves a hole, and the symbols hold that hole open." "A hole to what?" Dex asked. "To whatever wants to come through." Silence. The greenhouse hummed with the sound of growing things. "There have been other anchor points," Sage said. "Animals found in the forest with similar markings. A whale carcass on the beach a month ago, covered in symbols. Someone is building a circle." She met my eyes. "Hank was the first human point. He won't be the last." The words settled over me like earth on a coffin. "How many points does the circle need?" 7. The bathhouse was the most beautiful building I'd ever been terrified of. Built over natural hot springs, it was a structure of wood and stone, open to the sky in places, steam rising through gaps in the roof into the cold Alaskan air. The pools were carved from rock, some shallow and warm, some deep and searingly hot, and the water smelled of minerals and something clean and prehistoric. Range residents moved through the space with casual nudity and zero self-consciousness, sliding in and out of pools, washing, talking, existing in their bodies without the neurotic overlay of shame that civilization had grafted onto the experience. Sage had invited us here as a gesture of trust. The bathhouse is the heart of the range, she'd said. If you want to understand us, you have to understand this place. I was sitting on a stone bench at the edge of the largest pool, fully dressed, watching Dex and Theo in the water, and trying to keep my respiratory system functioning within normal parameters. Dex was, predictably, naked. He'd shed his clothes with the unself-conscious efficiency of someone who spent half his life in and out of wet gear on a boat. The hot spring steam rose off his shoulders. Water streamed down the planes of his chest. He was talking to Theo about something mundane, boat maintenance I think, with the easy physical confidence of a man who genuinely did not understand the effect he had on people, which was a lie, because he absolutely understood, and the grin he aimed at me when he caught me looking confirmed it. Theo was more reserved but no less devastating. He'd kept his boxer briefs on. Theo's modesty was a structural feature, not an oversight, and was chest-deep in the pool, the water blurring the lean lines of his body. Steam fogging his glasses so he'd taken them off, and now his eyes were unguarded and dark, and slightly unfocused in the way that made him look vulnerable, and approximately 300% more attractive. They were talking, heads close together. Dex's hand on Theo's shoulder in the water, a gesture so casual it clearly wasn't casual at all. From my vantage point on the stone bench, the image was. I need to be precise about this. The image of the two of them together in that pool, steam, water, skin, the easy intimacy of two men who were comfortable in each other's space in a way that went beyond friendship, hit me not as two separate attractions, but as a single, unified thing. I wasn't just attracted to Dex and separately attracted to Theo. I was attracted to them. Together. The shape they made in each other's proximity. The way Dex's hand on Theo's shoulder looked like it belonged there. The way Theo's quiet focus directed at Dex's face created an intensity that made the steam feel cold by comparison. This realization arrived like a train. I sat on my stone bench, fully dressed in a building full of naked people, and had a revelation about the nature of my own desire that was approximately 3 years overdue and completely unhelpful. You want them both, together, at the same time. You want to be in the middle of whatever that is. Thank you, brain. Very useful. Super convenient timing. Marlow. A young range resident, mid-20s, sun-freckled, bright-eyed, with the kind of guileless friendliness that suggested either genuine warmth or excellent manners, was approaching me with outstretched hands. You run the bookshop in Orgasta, right? Sage said you might be here. I'm Kai. I've been wanting to visit your shop for ages. I heard you have a first edition of... Kai took my hand. Both hands. Bare skin, enthusiastic grip, the full uninhibited physical contact of a person who hadn't been trained to treat my body like a live wire. The vision detonated. Kai at a bonfire, dancing, laughing. Joy, uncomplicated, full-body joy. Then the image shifted. Kai in the forest at night, walking with purpose, following a sound. The hum. The same hum I'd been hearing from the ocean, but here it was coming from the earth. Kai kneeling at a stone formation, upright stones in a circle, covered in symbols that glowed faintly. The same symbols as Hank's chest. Kai's hand on the central stone, eyes rolled back, face transformed by an ecstasy that looked almost orgasmic. And behind Kai, in the shadows between the stones, her, the woman, Isolde, watching with an expression of satisfaction that was terrifyingly gentle. I ripped my hands away. Kai stumbled back, startled. Are you okay? Did I? Fine. I was not fine. Kai, can I ask you something? The stone formation in the forest north of here. The standing stones, have you been there recently? Kai's face went blank. Not evasive, genuinely blank. The way a face looked when it encountered a wall where a memory should be. I don't. I know the stones, everyone does, but I don't think I've been there in months. Why? Memory manipulation. Someone had taken Kai to the stone formation, used them in a ritual, the ecstatic trance suggested energy harvesting, and then wiped the memory clean. The woman in the shadows, Isolde, was operating on the range, using residents, erasing their participation, building her circle with unwitting accomplices. I excused myself from Kai with a warmth I didn't feel, and went to find Dex and Theo. The truck cab on the drive home felt like a sealed chamber. Dark outside now. The September days were shortening, the darkness coming earlier and staying later, the long Alaskan slide toward winter. I told them everything. The vision from Kai, the stone formation, the memory manipulation. Isolde operating at the range, using residents, building anchor points. Sage's revelation about the 7-point circle. Theo went analytical. Memory manipulation requires either pharmaceutical intervention or psychic ability of significant magnitude. If this Isolde can selectively edit human memory, then she's not just a ritualist, Dex said. She's powerful. Like off-the-charts powerful. Like Marlow powerful, Theo said quietly. We both looked at him. He looked back, unblinking. Your gift, Marlow, it's rare. Sage reacted to you like you were significant. Not just unusual, significant. And this woman, whoever she is building a ritual that requires a seer. That's you. We don't know that. We can reasonably hypothesize. Dex hit a pothole. The truck lurched. My hand, bracing against the dashboard, slipped, and my bare palm landed on Dex's thigh. Bare skin where his jeans had torn at the knee on the boat that morning. A rip he hadn't bothered to mend because Dex's relationship with his clothing was one of cheerful neglect. Skin, warm. The muscle of his thigh taut under my palm. The vision was instantaneous and all-consuming. Desire, desire, desire. Not a memory, not a fantasy, present tense. Dex wanting me right now in this truck, with a specificity and intensity that left no room for ambiguity. He wanted to pull over. He wanted to press me into the seat. He wanted my hands on him, my mouth on him. He wanted to hear me say his name in a voice I hadn't used yet. He wanted... I snatched my hand back. The truck swerved. Dex corrected. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. His breathing was wrong, too fast, too shallow. He knew I'd seen something. He could tell from my face, from my flushed cheeks, from the way my eyes were wide and my lips were parted, and my body was radiating a heat that had nothing to do with the truck's heater. In the back seat, Theo was watching both of us in the rearview mirror. His expression was absolutely unreadable. His eyes were not. Nobody spoke. The truck ate up the dark miles, and the three of us sat in a silence that was so charged it could have powered the entire town. And I thought about the circle of anchor points and the 7 positions, and how Sage had said that each point was tuned to a specific frequency. And I wondered what frequency I was vibrating at right now, in this truck between these two men, with my skin humming and my gift wide open, and the echo of Dex's wanting still reverberating through my body, like the aftershock of an earthquake. Desire. That was the frequency. That was the key. I got home and the Veil Between's front door was open. I know I locked it. I always locked it. An old habit from Portland, where locking your door was basic survival, maintained in Orgasta Cliffs, where locking your door was considered mildly eccentric. But the door was ajar, and the bookshop beyond was dark, and the hair on the back of my neck was standing at full attention. I pushed the door open, stepped inside. Every book on the occult history shelf, 3 full cases, maybe 200 volumes, had been pulled down and arranged in a circle on the floor. Not thrown, not scattered. Arranged. With the precision of someone who understood that books were objects of power and treated them accordingly. In the center of the circle, a photograph I'd never seen before. I picked it up. My grandmother, Vera Kane. Age maybe 30, decades before I was born, decades before her death. She was standing next to a woman I now recognized with a cold certainty that settled in my stomach like a stone. Isolde. The woman from the visions. From the photograph in the records office, from Kai's stolen memories, from Hank Alessan's death. They were holding hands. They were both smiling, real smiles, unguarded and warm, the kind of smile you shared with someone you loved. Vera's hair was dark, her face unlined, her eyes bright with a joy I'd never seen in her. Isolde stood close, their shoulders touching, looking at the camera with the particular radiance of someone who was exactly where she wanted to be. On the back of the photo, in Vera's handwriting, the same handwriting I'd seen on 1,000 bookshop labels, on birthday cards, on the deed to this building. Forgive me for what I'm about to do to her. I stood in the circle of books with the photo in my hands, and the ghost of my grandmother flickering at the edge of my vision, and I understood, with the slow dawning horror of a plot twist I should have seen coming, that this was personal. It had always been personal. After. She was magnetic line about Sage, before the greenhouse scene. The range itself demanded attention. As Sage led us through the commune, I catalogued the residents with the compulsive observation that was both my gift and my curse. A woman splitting firewood with an axe, her arms lean and defined, sweat darkening the back of her tank top despite the September chill. 2 men building a fence together, shirtless, their bodies tanned and unselfconscious, one stocky and covered in tattoos, the other tall and willowy with a shaved head that caught the light. A group of women stretching on yoga mats in a clearing, their bodies moving through poses with the fluid grace of people who inhabited their physical selves completely. The range was a place where bodies were tools, not ornaments. Every person I saw was strong in the functional way, the muscle of hauling water, of building structures, of living off the land. And they moved through their space with an ease that made the outside world's obsession with appearance feel absurd. Clothing was minimal and practical. Overalls, sports bras, sarongs, hiking boots. Skin was everywhere, exposed to the sun, the wind, each other, and the casual intimacy of it made my psychic defenses prickle. Your people are very... Dex searched for a word. Comfortable? Sage supplied. I was going to say hot, but comfortable works. I elbowed him. He grinned. Theo, walking behind us, made a sound that might have been a cough and might have been suppressed laughter. Sage smiled without turning around. The range attracts people who've rejected the body shame that mainstream culture instills. When you strip away the fear of being seen, really seen, without clothing or pretense, what remains is remarkably beautiful. She glanced back at me. You understand that better than most, I think. Your gift forces you to see people without their pretenses. The difference is that here, people choose to be seen. You don't have to take it from them. The observation landed like a stone in still water. She was right. My gift stripped people bare without their consent. The range was a community that had chosen bareness. The distinction mattered. The greenhouse interrogation was wrapped in the scent of growing things. Basil, rosemary, something sweet I couldn't identify, and underneath it all, the damp earth smell of life in progress. Sage served tea from a clay pot, pouring with the ritualistic care of someone who understood that hospitality was a form of magic. The founding family's pact was a cage, she said, when I described the symbols on Hank's chest. But it wasn't the first arrangement. My lineage, the guardians of this convergence point, we've been here for millennia. Before the founding families. Before European contact. Before the Tlingit, even. We came from further south, following the ley lines north. Following them to what? Theo asked. He'd produced his notebook, and was taking notes with the focused intensity that I was learning to recognize as his information-gathering mode. The mode that, I now suspected, had been trained into him by something other than medical school. To the convergence. The point where multiple ley lines cross, energetic channels in the earth, rivers of power that flow beneath the surface. Where they converge, the barrier between dimensions thins. The deep one was drawn to the convergence the same way we were. It crossed through during a natural thinning centuries ago. It was supposed to pass through, a traveler, not an invader. But the breach closed behind it. Trapped, I said, trapped, and frightened, and reaching out for help in the only way it knew how, through the water, through the earth, through the dreams of anyone sensitive enough to hear. Sage's voice held centuries of accumulated understanding. The Tlingit heard it. They didn't cage it, they negotiated. Respect exchanged for safety. A relationship, not a prison. And then the founding families arrived, Dex said, with the expression of a man watching his family's mythology get rewritten. And they built a cage because that's what Europeans do with things they don't understand. Sage's voice was calm but carried weight. The pact changed the deep one. A century of imprisonment has made it desperate. What your visions show you, Marlow, the hunger, the reaching, the wanting, that's not its nature. That's what captivity has made it. After the bathhouse scene, before the truck ride home. I stood outside the bathhouse in the cold Alaskan air, my face burning, my heart hammering, processing the revelation that I wanted Dex and Theo, not as separate attractions but as a unified thing. The shape they made together, the energy they generated in proximity, the way Dex's hand on Theo's shoulder in the steam-filled water had looked like a completed circuit. Dex found me, of course he did. He was dressed again, jeans, flannel, his hair damp and darker for it, curling at his temples in a way that was cosmically unfair. You okay? You left in a hurry. Fine, just a lot of stimulation in there. His eyebrows rose. Stimulation? Sensory stimulation, psychic stimulation, I gestured vaguely at the bathhouse. The everything. Dex leaned against the wall, close enough that I could feel his warmth radiating in the cold air. Steam was still rising from his skin where the hot spring heat met the September chill, and the effect was visual. He was literally steaming, like something mythological, and I was losing my mind. Can I ask you something personal? He said. You're going to anyway. When you touch someone, during, intimate stuff, what happens? With your gift? I should have deflected, but Dex was asking with genuine care, and the question deserved honesty. It depends on intensity. Surface touches give me flashes, snapshots. But intimate contact, skin to skin, especially when emotions are heightened. I swallowed. That's a full download. I feel what they feel. See what they see. Experience their desire as if it were mine. So you'd basically be inside someone's head during sex. Inside their head, their body, their entire sensory experience, simultaneously experiencing my own sensation and theirs. I searched for the word. Overwhelming. The few times I've been intimate with someone, it was like being two people at once, feeling my own pleasure and theirs, layered, amplifying each other. Dex was very quiet. His breathing had changed, slower, deeper, more deliberate. That sounds incredible. It's terrifying. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the same gesture from the truck, but this time he didn't pull away. His fingers traced the curve of my ear, down to my jaw, along the line of my throat. The touch was feather-light and absolutely deliberate, and I felt every millimeter of it like a spark trailing along my skin. I'm going to kiss you, he said. His voice was low, rough, stripped of the usual grin. Not now, not here, but soon. And I want you to know it's coming so you can decide whether to let me. That's very considerate. I have my moments. His thumb grazed the pulse point on my throat. My heart was hammering under his touch, and he could feel it. I knew he could, from the way his eyes darkened and his breath caught. He was reading my body the way I read mine's, through skin, through contact, through the involuntary language of physical response. He dropped his hand and walked toward the truck. I stood in the cold with my throat tingling, and the absolute certainty that when Dex Moran kissed me, the psychic event it triggered was going to be extraordinary. More range lore from Sage and a bathhouse scene. Sage led us through the gardens, rows of raised beds where cold weather crops grew with implausible vigor. Kale, chard, root vegetables, herbs I didn't recognize. The growing season in Alaska was short and brutal, but these plants were thriving. The ley line convergence, Sage explained, noticing my attention. Everything grows better near the convergence. The energy in the earth feeds the roots. We've been cultivating this land for generations, not just the plants, but the energy itself. Tending the ley lines the way you'd tend a garden. You make it sound like landscaping. It is landscaping, on a dimensional scale. She picked a sprig of something purple and fragrant. This is dreamwort. It doesn't grow naturally in this hemisphere. The convergence energy allows it to exist here. A plant from another climate, sustained by the thin barrier between our world and whatever's on the other side. She offered it to me. Hold it. I took it. The sprig was warm, warmer than the air, warmer than my hand. Through the contact, my gift received a faint impression. Sunlight from a different sun. Wind that carried different spores. A world where plants were the dominant life form and consciousness resided in root systems rather than brains. You felt it, Sage said. Another dimension. Leaking through. The barrier here isn't a wall. It's a membrane. Things seep through, energies, impressions, occasionally physical matter. The dreamwort seed came through decades ago. I found it growing between the standing stones and recognized it from my grandmother's descriptions. She studied me. Your gift is stronger near the convergence. Have you noticed? I had noticed. Since arriving at the range, my psychic perception had been dialed up, more vivid, more detailed, harder to control. The accidental touch with Kai had been more intense than any uninvited vision I'd experienced. And the residual awareness of the environment, the hum of the ley lines, the thrum of the standing stones, the faint signatures of 100 human consciousnesses living and breathing and desiring within the commune's boundaries, was overwhelming. The convergence amplifies psychic abilities, Sage said. For someone with your level of gift, being here is like standing next to a speaker. Everything is louder, more detailed, harder to filter. She paused. It also amplifies desire. Emotional intensity of all kinds, but especially desire. The ley lines respond to wanting. It's one of the most powerful psychic frequencies. Which is why the range attracts the kind of people it does. You're saying your commune is full of beautiful, sexually liberated people because the ley lines make everyone horny? I'm saying the ley lines attract people who are honest about their desires. People who have stopped pretending they don't want. That honesty, that willingness to feel without filtering, is its own form of power. She smiled. And yes, the ley lines probably don't hurt in that department. In the bathhouse, I watched the commune through new eyes. The casual nudity wasn't just cultural, it was practical. In a place where psychic sensitivity was amplified, where the ley lines made every emotion louder, clothing was almost redundant. The body's truth was visible regardless. The guy in the deep pool whose chest was broad and soft and covered in dark hair wasn't hiding anything. Neither was the woman beside him, lean and small-breasted and unself-conscious. A non-binary person with vitiligo patterns across their shoulders sat at the pool's edge, trailing their feet in the water, their body a map of melanin and beauty. An older woman, 60 maybe, swam laps with the steady power of someone who'd been strong their whole life and saw no reason to stop. These were bodies that worked. Bodies that grew food and built shelters and carried water and lived outside. They weren't sculpted or optimized or displayed. They were used. And the unself-conscious functionality of them was, paradoxically, more attractive than any performance of beauty I'd encountered in the city. Dex in the water was a different category entirely. He'd settled into the largest pool, the one heated by the deepest spring, and the steam rising off his shoulders made him look mythological. His body was the body of a man who hauled crab pots in freezing water for a living. Broad, functional, scarred in places, a line across his ribs from a winch cable, a starburst on his shoulder from a deck bolt, and utterly, aggressively alive. He sat in the water with his arms along the pool's edge, his head tipped back, eyes closed, and the column of his throat, long, tanned, the Adam's apple prominent, was a view that I was going to have difficulty forgetting. Theo in the water was a study in contrasts. Where Dex was sprawl and ease, Theo was contained even in relaxation. He sat with his arms folded across the pool's edge, his chin on his forearms, the water up to his shoulders, only his head and the graceful line of his neck visible. Without his glasses, his eyes were enormous, dark, liquid, slightly unfocused. He looked younger, softer. The careful architecture of his composure dissolved in the heat. They were talking quietly. Dex said something. Theo smiled, the real smile, not the polite one. Dex's hand found Theo's shoulder under the water, and the touch was casual and claiming. And from my bench I watched them together, and felt the composite attraction hit me like a wave. Not Dex and Theo separately. Dex and Theo together. The shape they made. The energy they generated. The way Dex's physical openness complemented Theo's intellectual precision. The way Theo's careful attention balanced Dex's reckless generosity. They were better together than they were apart. And I, watching from my stone bench, fully dressed and psychically vibrating, was better with both of them than I was with either alone. The realization settled into my body like heat from the springs. Not sudden but gradual, warming from the inside. I wanted them, both, together. Not as a fantasy, as a life. Chapter 4. The Woman in the Fire. At 3 a.m., I sat cross-legged in the circle of books with the photograph in my lap, and waited for my dead grandmother to stop being coy. Vera materialized slowly, more solid than usual, which I knew meant she was burning energy she couldn't afford. When she saw the photo, she went still in a way that ghosts shouldn't be able to. Ghosts were supposed to be ethereal, flickering, impermanent. Vera stood in my bookshop like a pillar of grief given form. "Where did you get that?" she asked, and her voice, usually dry, usually amused, usually delivering commentary with the energy of a woman who'd earned the right to judge everyone she met, was stripped bare. "It was left here. Someone arranged every book on the occult shelf into a circle, and put this in the center." I held up the photograph. "You want to tell me who she is?" "You already know who she is." "I want to hear you say it." Vera looked at the photo for a long time. The spectral light that constituted her body flickered, a candle in a draught. "Her name is Isolde Hargrove," Vera said. "She was my closest friend, the most powerful blood witch in the Hargrove bloodline, possibly the most powerful the line ever produced. She was brilliant and fierce and passionate, and she could do things with blood magic that made the rest of the founding families look like children playing with matches." Past tense. In 1989, I sealed Isolde inside a pocket dimension to prevent her from completing a ritual that would have torn the barrier between our world and what lies beyond it. She has been trapped there for 35 years. Vera's voice cracked on the number. "If she's appearing in your visions, if she's reaching through to this side, she's found a way to extend her influence beyond the seal. She's partially free, and she's finishing what she started." I looked at the photo again. Two women holding hands, smiling. "You were in love with her." "I loved her. That's not the same thing, but it's adjacent." Vera's ghost wavered. "She wasn't evil, Marlow. She was desperate. The deep one was dying, not dead, not sleeping, dying. The barrier between dimensions was killing it, slow and terrible. Isolde believed that opening a permanent door between worlds would save it. She was willing to do anything. Sacrifice anyone. She convinced herself that the ends justified the means." "And you stopped her." "I sealed her in a space between spaces. A prison designed to hold her power. I told myself it was for the town's safety." Vera's form dimmed. "And it was. But that's not all it was." "What was it?" "It was betrayal. The worst kind. The kind you commit against someone who trusts you completely." Her spectral eyes met mine. "She didn't fight me, Marlow. When I activated the seal, she looked at me and she didn't fight. She said, 'I understand,' and then she was gone." Vera flickered violently and vanished. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The books on the floor trembled as if something had passed through the room at speed. I sat alone in the dark with a photograph of two women who'd loved each other and destroyed each other, and I felt the shape of this story, the real story, underneath the murders and the symbols, beginning to resolve. This wasn't just a supernatural mystery. It was a love story gone wrong. A betrayal that had echoed for 35 years. And I was standing in the wreckage. Morning brought the second body. A scream from the harbor, 7 a.m., sharp enough to cut through the fog. I was already on the cliff path, couldn't sleep, hadn't tried, and I ran toward the sound with the resigned urgency of someone who'd been expecting this. Jonas Kessler, 28. Nephew of Mayor Eleanor Kessler. Found on the rocks below the cliffs with the same symbols carved into his chest, the same impossible saltwater drowning. But different this time, the body was arranged. Arms outstretched, facing the ocean, as if in prayer or surrender. A supplicant at the altar of the deep. The harbor was chaos again, but sharper now. The first death had been a shock. The second was a pattern. Eleanor Kessler arrived in a black car that was too expensive for a town this size, stepping onto the dock in heels that had no business on wet timber, her silver hair immaculate, her face a masterpiece of controlled fury. She surveyed the scene. She surveyed me. "Miss Kane?" Her voice could have frozen the harbor. "I believe we need to talk." "After," I said, and walked toward the body. The state trooper tried to stop me. Dex stepped in his path with a smile and a handshake that turned into a conversation about fishing licenses, and by the time the trooper looked back, I was kneeling beside Jonas Kessler with my gloves off. I touched him. The vision was more vivid than the first. Sharper. Higher definition. As if whatever psychic residue the dead carried was intensifying, or my gift was opening wider, or both. Jonas's final hours. A sea cave at the base of the cliffs, accessible only at low tide. He'd been lured there by a voice, beautiful, female, singing in the ancient binding language. He'd followed it like a man in a dream, descending the cliff face on a path that shouldn't have existed, entering the cave as the ocean retreated, and the stone walls glistened with bioluminescent life. She was waiting. Isolde Hargrove, standing in the center of the cave, as if it were a throne room. Not a projection, not a ghost. Physical, solid. Real in a way that contradicted everything Vera had said about the seal. She was wearing dark clothing, her hair loose, and she was beautiful in the way that a blade is beautiful, with an edge. She touched Jonas's face. He wept. Not from fear, from ecstasy. Her touch carried something, a transmission of emotion so pure and overwhelming, that it bypassed his rational mind entirely. He felt loved. He felt known. He felt, for the first time in his life, completely seen. Then the symbols carved themselves into his flesh, not with a blade but with light, etching into skin like fire writing on paper, and the ocean rushed in. Jonas died smiling. But in his final seconds, he looked past Isolde into the water filling the cave. Something was there. Something vast, luminous, and aware. A consciousness that filled the water the way light fills a room. It was looking at Jonas. It was looking at me. Through the vision, across the boundary of death, the deep one's attention found me. It recognized me, not as a stranger, as something expected. Something wanted. Something it had been waiting for with the patience of a being that measured time in centuries. It knew my name. I came out of the vision screaming. Dex caught me, his arms around me before I hit the ground, one hand cradling my head, his body between me and the rocks. Theo was there too, appearing with the instantaneous efficiency that suggested he'd been poised to move the whole time, his hand steady, a water bottle already open, his voice a low anchor. "Breathe, breathe, you're here, you're back." I couldn't stop shaking. Not from the murder, not from the symbols or the sea cave or even Isolde's terrifying tenderness. From the thing in the water. The way it had seen me. The way seeing it had felt not like being observed, but like being desired. I told them what I'd seen, the sea cave, Isolde, the willing victim. I told them about the entity. I did not tell them that when the deep one's attention had found me through the vision, my body had responded with a surge of sensation that was closer to arousal than fear. That it had wanted me, and some traitorous part of me had wanted it back. Some secrets you kept even from the people you trusted. Especially from them. That night I showed up at Dex's cabin at the harbor. I can give you a list of reasons. I was terrified. I couldn't be alone. The vision had left me raw and exposed, my psychic defenses shredded. I needed a warm body and a locked door, and someone who would hold the dark at arm's length while I put myself back together. All of those were true. None of them were the whole truth. The whole truth was that I'd been carrying Dex Moran's desire inside me for days, every accidental touch downloading another fragment of how he wanted me, and the weight of it had become unbearable. Not because it was unwanted, because it was the only thing that felt real. In a world of dead fishermen and ancient symbols, and an entity in the deep water that knew my name, Dex's wanting was the most vivid, most alive, most human thing I could feel. He opened the door, took one look at me, pulled me inside without a word. His cabin was small, one room essentially, with a bed and a kitchen separated by ambition rather than architecture. It smelled like wood smoke and salt and him. A cast iron pan on the stove. A wool blanket on the bed that looked like it had been hand-knitted by someone's grandmother. Fishing gear organized with surprising precision along one wall. Dex was chaos in every other arena of his life. But on the water, he was meticulous. "Talk to me," he said. So I talked. About the vision. About Jonas Kessler dying in ecstasy while symbols wrote themselves into his skin. About Isolde's physical presence in the cave, which meant Vera's seal was failing. About the thing in the water that had looked at me through a dead man's eyes and known me. Dex listened. He was good at listening when it mattered, leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, those blue eyes steady on my face, absorbing everything without interrupting. When I finished, the silence was full, not empty. "The thing in the water," he said. "You said it recognized you?" "Yes. How?" "I don't know. Like it had been waiting for me specifically. Like I was expected." "Expected for what?" I didn't answer. He stepped closer. "Marlow." His voice was low. "What aren't you telling me?" "I'm telling you everything that matters. You're telling me everything about the case. You're not telling me about you." He was close now, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his body, could smell the cedar smoke and salt that was his particular signature. "I saw your face when you came out of that vision. It wasn't just fear." "It was fear. It was fear and something else. I know because I know what your face looks like when it's just fear, and I know what it looks like when it's—" He stopped himself. We were very close. The cabin was very small. The ocean was very loud outside, and the hum was there underneath it, constant and patient and persistent. "When it's what?" I whispered. He put his hands on my face. Both hands cupping my jaw, thumbs tracing my cheekbones. The calluses on his palms were rough, the hands of a man who worked with rope and metal and the unforgiving surfaces of a fishing boat. His fingers slid into my hair. His eyes were inches from mine, blue, intent, stripped of the grin and the deflection. This was the Dex underneath, raw, serious, wanting with a focus that felt like a beam of light. "Tell me to stop," he said. "No." He kissed me, not soft, hungry. His mouth tasted like whiskey and salt. His hands tightened in my hair. He pulled me closer, not gently, not carefully, with the full-body urgency of a man who had been holding back for months and had finally, gratefully, stopped. Both hands cupping my jaw, his thumbs tracing the line of my cheekbones. The calluses on his palms were rough against my skin, the hands of a man who worked with rope and metal and the unforgiving surfaces of a fishing boat. His fingers slid into my hair. His eyes were inches from mine, blue, intent, stripped of the grin and the charm and the easygoing deflection. This was the Dex underneath, raw, serious, wanting with a focus that felt like being held in a beam of light. Skin, his palms against my cheeks, his fingers in my hair, the calluses of his thumbs tracing the line of my cheekbones. The visions came, and they weren't horror, they were Dex. His desire, his fear for me, his loneliness, his fantasy of this exact moment. He'd imagined this, many times. In this cabin, on this bed, in the shower, on the boat, at the abyss watching me across the table, in every quiet moment where his mind was free to wander toward the thing he wanted most. He saw me through his eyes, and I was extraordinary. Not damaged, not fragile, not the girl with the gloves and the flinching. In Dex's vision of me, I was luminous. Strong, the most compelling thing in his world. I kissed him, or he kissed me. The sequence of events was unclear because it happened simultaneously, our mouths finding each other with the urgency of something that had been building for 1.5 years and had finally run out of patience. He tasted like whiskey and salt. His hands tightened in my hair. He pulled me closer, not gently, not carefully, with the full body hunger of a man who'd been restraining himself for months and was done. My gift was wide open. Every point of contact was a channel, and the visions poured through in waves, his memories, his desires, his present tense experience of this moment. I felt his hands on my body from the inside, felt what my mouth did to his nervous system, felt the exact nature and intensity of his arousal with a psychic clarity that was both overwhelming and the most intimate thing I'd ever experienced. I was inside his wanting, swimming in it, drowning in it, and woven through the desire, threading through the visions like a dark current through warm water, flashes of something else. The ocean, the deep water, the hum. Dex was entangled with whatever lived beneath the cliffs, his bloodline, his family's history, the Moran connection to the deep, and his body carried the resonance of that connection like a tuning fork. When he touched me, when his desire was at its most concentrated, the entanglement activated. I could see the binding circle through the lens of his arousal, 6 points glowing in a pattern I now understood. And a 7th point. The 7th point was a person. The 7th point was me. I saw it at the peak of the most intense vision I'd ever received. My body arched against his name in my mouth, his breath against my throat. The moment of highest psychic clarity was also the moment of greatest physical intensity, and the image burned itself into my mind with the permanence of a brand. The complete circle, all 7 points blazing, and in the center, the door. Open. Afterward, we lay tangled in his narrow bed, the wool blanket rough against my bare skin, his arm across my waist, the sound of the harbor filtering through the thin walls. For 30 seconds, everything was perfect. Then the psychic hangover hit, fragments of visions echoing, the image of the 7th point searing behind my eyes, and I slipped out of his arms, out of his bed, into the cold morning air of the cabin, reaching for my clothes with hands that were shaking. I didn't wake him. I couldn't face the conversation. What I'd seen in the vision, the 7th anchor point, myself at the center of the circle, changed everything. It meant the murders, the symbols, Isolde's return, possibly even the sealskin gloves. All of it might be designed to pull me in, to position me, to make me willing. I called Theo from the harbor. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he'd been thinking about the case, which meant he'd been doing exactly what I needed him to do, being the analytical counterweight to my psychic chaos. Marlow, it's 5 a.m. I know, I need to talk to you about something. I told him about the 7th anchor point, the image of myself at the center of the circle, the possibility that everything that had happened was designed to draw me in. I did not tell him where I'd spent the night. He didn't ask. The silence where the question should have been was louder than the ocean. Finally, Theo said, "If you're the 7th point, then whoever is building this circle needs you alive and cooperative. Which means everything that's happened, the gloves, the visions, maybe even the murders, might be designed to pull you in. We need to understand what happens when the circle completes." His voice was clinical, careful, controlled. But underneath the professionalism, I heard something raw. Something that sounded like a man who'd been awake at 5 a.m. for reasons that had nothing to do with the case, and everything to do with the woman who was calling him, instead of being where she'd been. I closed my eyes. The harbor smelled like brine and diesel. Dex's scent was still on my skin. Theo's voice was in my ear. And somewhere beneath the cliffs, The hum continued. Patient, hungry, knowing. Eleanor Kessler's summons to Kessler Lodge for tea was the small-town equivalent of receiving a subpoena wrapped in cashmere. The lodge was the grandest building in Orgasta Cliffs, a sprawling wooden structure on the highest point of the cliff, built by the Kessler family in 1891, and renovated every decade with increasing expense and decreasing subtlety. Dark wood paneling, taxidermy that bordered on aggressive. A moose head in the foyer watched me with glass eyes that conveyed judgment. Views from every window that could shatter your heart if you looked too long. Eleanor served tea in a sitting room that was designed to make visitors feel simultaneously welcomed and outmatched. She was immaculate, silver hair in a chignon, pearl earrings, a cashmere sweater the color of storm clouds. She poured from a pot that was probably worth more than my bookshop. Your grandmother and I were friends, Eleanor said, with the air of someone laying a card on the table. We disagreed about many things, but we shared one conviction. This town has secrets that need protecting, and there are people who lack the temperament to be trusted with them. Is that what I lack? Temperament? You lack discretion. Your grandmother kept this town safe for 40 years by knowing when to use her power and when to stay out of it. You, my dear, have not yet learned the second part. A man was murdered, Eleanor. 2 men. Your nephew. Something cracked behind Eleanor's composure. Brief, fierce, immediately contained. I am aware of what happened to Jonas. I am also aware that the investigation you are conducting, with your fisherman and your doctor, is venturing into territory that is significantly more dangerous than you understand. Then help me understand. Eleanor studied me. You know about Isolde Hargrove. My grandmother sealed her in a pocket dimension in 1989. Yes, to protect the town, but that's not the only reason. Eleanor set down her teacup with the precision of someone placing a chess piece. She did it because Isolde asked her to. The world tilted. What? Isolde saw what she was becoming. What the Deep One's influence was doing to her. She went to Vera and she said, "Seal me away before I do something we can't undo." And Vera, who loved her, who would have done anything for her, honored the request. Eleanor's eyes were ancient, calculating, and not unkind. Think about that, Miss Kane, before you decide who the villain is. I left the lodge with my worldview rearranged and my certainties in rubble. Isolde wasn't just the antagonist. She was the woman who'd asked to be imprisoned. Who'd chosen 35 years of isolation over becoming something she couldn't live with. And now she was back. And she was finishing the ritual she'd asked to be stopped from completing. What had changed? What had broken? I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice Dex on my porch until I was 10 feet away. He wasn't smiling. He was sitting on the steps in the gathering dusk, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious in a way that I'd only seen a handful of times. "We need to talk about last night," he said. "Not the sex, the other thing." He held up his hand. On his palm, glowing faintly in the failing light, was one of the binding symbols. Burned into his skin like a brand. It had appeared that morning. It was warm. And it was pulsing in rhythm with the ocean. Expand the sex scene, insert after. He put his hands on my face, expansion. What followed was not gentle. I don't mean violent, I mean urgent. The urgency of 2 people who'd been wanting for over a year and had run out of reasons to deny it. His mouth on mine was a homecoming I hadn't known I needed, and when he lifted me onto the kitchen counter, his hands on my waist, gripping, the strength in his arms effortless, I wrapped my legs around him and pulled him closer, and the vision that flooded through the contact was staggering. I was inside his desire, not observing it, inhabiting it. I felt what my body did to his nervous system. The weight of me in his arms, the heat of my thighs against his hips, the scent of my hair. Through his senses, I was experiencing myself as a sexual being for the first time, not from the inside, where I was all anxiety and self-consciousness, but from the outside, where I was apparently devastating. He wanted me with a single-mindedness that was almost religious in its intensity. We moved from the counter to the bed. His cabin was small enough that this was a matter of 3 steps, and he made them without putting me down, carrying me with the same easy strength he used to haul equipment on the boat. I landed on the wool blanket, scratchy, warm, smelling of him, and he was over me, his weight braced on his forearms, looking down at me with an expression that was simultaneously reverent and ravenous. "If it gets too much," he said. "The visions, if you need me to stop." "I'll tell you. Promise." "I promise. Now stop being noble and—" He kissed me before I finished the sentence. His mouth moved from my lips to my jaw to my throat, finding the spot where neck met shoulder, the one from the vision I'd accidentally received on the boat, the one he'd been fantasizing about for months. The reality of his mouth there, the heat and the pressure and the slight scrape of stubble, sent a cascade through both our nervous systems simultaneously. My pleasure and his awareness of my pleasure, feeding back into each other, a loop of sensation that built and built. His hands found the hem of my shirt. He pulled it over my head and the cold cabin air hit my skin, and then his mouth was moving lower and I was arching into him, my hands in his hair, gripping. And the visions were coming faster now, fragments of his desire, images of things he wanted to do, things he'd imagined doing in this bed, in the shower, on the boat, everywhere, a gallery of fantasies starring me that would have been embarrassing if they hadn't been the hottest thing I'd ever experienced. I pulled his shirt off, ran my hands over his chest, the broad planes of muscle, the scatter of hair, the dip of his navel, the ridged line of his hip bones that pointed downward like an arrow. He shivered under my touch, not from cold, and I felt the shiver from both sides, the sensation of my hands on his skin, and his experience of being touched by someone who could feel what he was feeling. A double helix of pleasure, spiraling. "Marlow." His voice was wrecked. "What you're doing when you touch me, I can feel you feeling me. Does that make sense? It's like a feedback loop. Yeah, it's God." He pressed his forehead to mine. Breathed. "It's a lot. Too much?" "Not enough. Not nearly enough." What followed was explicit and unhurried and punctuated by visions. Every point of contact was a channel, and the channels stayed open. I experienced his hands on my body from both sides, my sounds through his ears, the particular rhythm we found together. His urgency and my surrender, the way our bodies fit, the specific moment when the sensation crested and the psychic feedback loop hit its peak, and I was flooded with a vision that had nothing to do with desire. The binding circle, complete, 7 points blazing. The 7th point was a person. The person was me, and the door at the center was open. I gasped, not from pleasure this time, and Dex misread it, or maybe read it perfectly, because he slowed, gentled, brought me back from the cosmic to the physical with his mouth and his hands, and the weight of his body anchoring me to the present. Expand the morning after with Marlow processing and calling Theo. The harbor at dawn was a painting I didn't deserve, rose and gold on dark water, the fishing fleet's masts making crosses against the sky, the smell of brine and diesel, and the particular cold morning freshness that Alaska specialized in. I walked the dock with Dex's scent still on my skin, his touch still echoing in my nerve endings, and the psychic aftershock of the night's visions still strobing behind my eyes. The 7th anchor point, me, at the center of the circle. The door open. I sat on a piling and called Theo. He answered on the first ring. "Marlow, it's 5 a.m. "I know. Did I wake you?" "No." A pause. "I've been up for a while." I could hear it in his voice, the sleeplessness, the churning mind, the particular quality of 5 a.m. wakefulness that came from lying in bed thinking about things you couldn't solve. I imagined him in his apartment, reading lamp on, books spread around him, his glasses off because he'd been rubbing his eyes, his dark curls mussed from tossing. The image was domestic and devastating. "I need to talk to you about something I saw. During—" I stopped. The vision had come during sex with Dex. "How exactly did you tell one of the 2 men you were falling for about a supernatural revelation you'd received during orgasm with the other one?" The Emily Post Guide for Paranormal Polyamory had not been written. During your vision, Theo supplied carefully. He knew about my gift. He could fill in the blanks. Tell me what you saw. I told him about the 7th point. The image of myself at the center of the complete circle. The possibility that everything, the gloves, the murders, Isolde's return, was designed to draw me in. There was silence on the line. I could hear Theo thinking, the particular quality of silence that accompanied his analytical process, the mental equivalent of watching gears turn. If you're the 7th point, he said, then whoever is building this circle needs you alive and cooperative. Which means everything that's happened has been a manipulation. The sealskin gloves, a gift to establish trust. The visions, increasingly detailed, drawing you deeper into the mystery. Even the entity touched residents at the range, leading you to information that makes Isolde's plan seem comprehensible, even sympathetic. His analysis was precise, clinical, the words of a man who understood manipulation from the inside, because he'd been trained in it. The irony, Theo, the spy, diagnosing another spy's methods, sat between us, unspoken. There's something else, I said. The visions during intimate contact are more powerful, more detailed, higher resolution. It's like my gift has a volume knob, and physical intimacy turns it up. Silence. I could hear him breathing. The breathing had changed, faster, shallower. That's consistent with the psychometric literature, he said, in a voice that was making a heroic effort to sound clinical. Heightened emotional and physical arousal amplifies psychic receptivity. The neural pathways that process intimacy overlap significantly with the pathways that process psychic information. It makes sense that the two would... He stopped. I'm being clinical because the alternative is being something else. What else? Honest. A beat. The alternative to clinical is admitting that I've spent the last 2 years thinking about what would happen if you touched me. Really touched me, without gloves, without barriers. What you'd see, what you'd feel. His voice was barely audible. And I'm terrified, because whatever you'd see, the real me, all of me, including the parts I've been hiding, you might not... Theo. You might not want what you find. Come over, I'll make the coffee this time. It's 5 a.m. I know what time it is. Come over. He came over. He brought a book, because Theo without a book was like Dex without a grin, fundamentally incomplete. I made coffee, badly. My coffee was always bad. Theo tolerated it with the grace of a man who believed politeness was a form of love. We sat at my kitchen table as the dawn turned the windows gold, and we didn't touch, and we didn't talk about feelings, and the not touching and not talking was its own language. A dialect of restraint and longing that we'd become fluent in over 3 years of proximity and patience. But something had shifted. The air between us was different, thinner, more permeable. The wall that Theo maintained, polite, professional, composed, had developed a crack, and through that crack I could see the real architecture, a man who was falling apart with wanting, held together only by the fear of what his truth would cost. Expand Eleanor's Kessler Lodge scene with more lore. Kessler Lodge was the grand old lady of Orgasta Cliffs, a sprawling structure that combined the architectural ambitions of a Victorian mansion with the structural requirements of a building that had to survive Alaskan winters. Dark wood paneling covered every surface. Taxidermy lined the halls: moose, bear, eagle, salmon, a hierarchy of Alaskan wildlife arranged with the meticulous attention of a museum curator who was also, possibly, a psychopath. The views from every window could shatter your heart. Eleanor's sitting room was on the 2nd floor, facing the ocean. She served tea in china that had survived the voyage from Bavaria in 1889, delicate, painted with blue flowers, worth more per cup than most families' monthly groceries. She handled it with the casual confidence of someone for whom expensive things were just things. Sit, she said. Not a request. I sat. The chair was upholstered in something that might have been velvet, and might have been a statement of intent. Your grandmother and I disagreed about many things, Eleanor began, pouring with the precision of a woman who'd been trained in hospitality as a strategic discipline. She believed the Deep One deserved sympathy. I believed it deserved containment. She thought the founding families should evolve their relationship with the supernatural. I thought the founding families should maintain the barriers that kept the town safe. Who was right? That depends on whether you define right as the choice that preserves the most life, or the choice that honors the most truth. She set down the teapot. Vera was right that the Deep One was suffering. I was right that its freedom posed existential risk. We were both right. We were both wrong. This is the nature of complicated problems. What do you know about Isolde Hargrove? Eleanor's composure was excellent, but not perfect. Something flickered behind her eyes at the name. Old recognition, old fear, and something that might have been respect. Isolde was the most powerful practitioner born in Orgasta Cliffs since the founding. Blood magic of a caliber that made the rest of us nervous. She could read the binding language like a native speaker, the symbols that the founding families used in the pact, the ones carved into your dead fishermen. Isolde could read them the way you read a newspaper. Eleanor sipped her tea. She was also the most passionate person I've ever met. About everything, her work, her beliefs, her relationships. She loved your grandmother with an intensity that was... A pause. Visible? Visible how? They amplified each other. Kane seers and Hargrove blood witches are a dangerous combination. When Vera and Isolde worked together, the supernatural output was extraordinary. They could modify the pact, strengthen the barriers, communicate with the Deep One more clearly than anyone in the founding family's history. Eleanor set down her cup with the precision of someone placing a chess piece. They were also the most formidable pair of investigators this town ever had. Before your little trio with the fisherman and the doctor, it was Vera and Isolde who solved the town's mysteries. And they were magnificent. Until 1989. Until 1989. When Isolde decided the pact was unjust, and the Deep One deserved freedom, and Vera decided the risk was too great, and two women who'd loved each other for a decade chose opposite sides of an impossible question. Eleanor's eyes found mine. Your grandmother kept this town safe for 40 years by knowing when to use her power and when to stay out of it. You, my dear, have not yet learned the second part. I don't think staying out of it is an option anymore. No, Eleanor agreed. I don't think it is. She stood. Walked to the window. The ocean was visible below. Slate gray, white-capped, endless. Isolde sealed herself away because she loved your grandmother more than she loved her own freedom. That's the part nobody talks about. The sacrifice wasn't forced. It was offered. The most powerful blood witch in Orgasta Cliffs history chose 35 years of isolation because the alternative was becoming something her lover couldn't bear to see. She turned back to me. Think about that, Miss Kane, before you decide who the villain is.